Picture this. You're standing in a grocery store aisle picking up a dozen eggs or a loaf of bread, and you notice the price has gone up again. You sigh, put it in your cart, and wonder, who is responsible for this? Most people assume it's the farmer. After all, they grow the food, so they must be setting the price and walking away with the profit, right? It seems logical on the surface. But here's the thing. That assumption is almost completely wrong. The truth behind food pricing is far more layered, far more surprising, and honestly, a little shocking once you see the full picture. So before you blame the farmer the next time your grocery bill stings, let's take a closer look at what's really going on. So here's the question that sits at the heart of everything we're about to explore. If farmers are the ones doing the actual work of growing our food, why don't they get to decide what it costs? It seems like it should be simple. You grow it, you price it. But as we're about to discover, the reality is anything but simple. Over the next several minutes, we're going to walk through the entire food supply chain, starting at the farm field where food is actually grown, and following it all the way to the grocery store shelf where you pick it up and pay for it. Along the way, we'll meet the players, the corporations, the markets, and the systems that quietly shape every price tag you see. By the end, you'll have a completely different understanding of who truly holds the power when it comes to the food on your plate. Now let's start where food actually begins, on the farm. Picture a typical farmer. They wake up before sunrise, work through the heat of the day, and often don't stop until well after dark. Before a single seed goes into the ground, they've already spent thousands of dollars on equipment, fertilizer, pesticides, and labor. It's a massive financial gamble every single season. And after months of hard work, when harvest finally comes and the crops are ready to sell, you might expect the farmer to name their price, to say, "This is what my work is worth." But that's not how it works. In most cases, farmers have almost no say in what they get paid. They walk into the market and accept whatever price is being offered that day. They don't set the price, they simply take it. And that single reality changes everything about how our food system actually functions. And they simply have to decide whether to sell at that price or wait and hope for something better. The answer lies in commodity markets. Most staple crops like wheat, corn, soybeans, and rice are not priced locally or individually. Instead, they are traded as standardized commodities on massive global exchanges, most notably the Chicago Board of Trade, one of the oldest and largest commodity exchanges in the world. On these exchanges, prices shift every single day, sometimes every single hour. A sudden drought warning in Brazil, a geopolitical conflict disrupting shipping routes, a surprising government report on crop yields, or even large investment funds moving money around can all send prices swinging dramatically, keeping them far below what most people would consider fair compensation for the enormous effort and risk involved in growing our food. Farmers are price takers, not price makers. When harvest season arrives and a farmer brings thousands of bushels of corn to market, they have absolutely zero ability to negotiate a better deal. They simply accept whatever price the market offers that day. Think about what that means in practice. A farmer who spent months planting, nurturing, and harvesting their crop walks away with whatever number appears on the exchange board, nothing more. And here is why that number stays stubbornly low. The ability to say no and wait for a better deal. The answer lies in the long and complex chain of players standing between the farm and your grocery cart. Once a farmer sells their harvest, it enters a world they have almost no control over. First, it passes through grain elevators, which store and aggregate crops from many different farms. Then it moves to processors who transform raw commodities into usable ingredients. After that, distributors and wholesalers move the product across regions and countries. Finally, retailers place it on shelves with their own markup applied. Each of these players adds their own margin along the way. And here is the critical part. Each of these entities holds significantly more pricing power than the farmer who originally grew the food. To make this real, let's walk through a simple example. A loaf of bread sitting on your grocery store shelf. It starts with wheat. At the farm level, the wheat used to make a single loaf might cost only a few cents, just a few cents. But that wheat doesn't magically become bread. It has to be transported to a grain elevator, sold to a miller, processed into flour, shipped to a bakery, mixed with other ingredients, baked, cooled, sliced, and packaged. Then it gets loaded onto a truck, driven to a distribution center, transferred again, and finally placed on a store shelf under carefully designed lighting to catch your eye. Every single one of those steps costs money, and every player along the way takes a cut. By the end of that journey, that loaf might sell for $4 or $5. The farmer, they see only a tiny fraction of that final price. The rest disappears into the chain between field and fork, leaving them with little choice but to accept whatever price these giants decide to offer. Sitting between farmers and retailers are massive agribusiness corporations that most consumers have never heard of. Companies like Cargill, Archer Daniels Midland, and Tyson Foods operate as powerful intermediaries, purchasing enormous volumes of agricultural products directly from farmers, and then selling processed goods to retailers and food manufacturers worldwide. These corporations wield extraordinary bargaining power precisely because of their sheer scale. When you are buying from thousands of farmers simultaneously, you can essentially dictate the terms. If one farmer refuses your offered price, there are hundreds of others willing to accept it. This dynamic creates a situation where farmers are essentially competing against each other, driving prices downward rather than upward, widening the gap between farm and fork even further. Large grocery chains are not passive players simply passing costs along to consumers. They are powerful price setters in their own right. Chains like Walmart, Kroger, and Costco negotiate aggressively with suppliers, using their massive purchasing volume as leverage to demand the lowest possible wholesale prices. Once they secure those deals, they set retail prices based on their own profit margins, competitive positioning, and consumer psychology. Strategies like charm pricing, where something costs $9.99 instead of $10, or loss leaders designed to draw shoppers in. None of these retail pricing decisions have anything to do with what the farmer originally received for their product. As fewer, larger corporations dominate food processing, farmers have fewer buyers to negotiate with, leaving them with little choice but to accept whatever terms are offered. Today, a significant number of farmers don't even sell their products on the open market. Instead, they operate under contracts with large processors or retailers, agreements that lock them into predetermined prices negotiated well before harvest time. On the surface, this sounds like a reasonable trade-off. Contracts offer farmers a degree of income predictability, shielding them from the worst swings of volatile commodity markets. But there's a serious downside that often goes unnoticed. When food prices surge at the consumer level, contracted farmers simply cannot benefit. The gains don't flow back down the chain to the people who actually grew the food. Instead, they're captured by processors, distributors, and retailers sitting comfortably above the farmer in the supply chain. The pressure comes relentlessly from both directions. On the other side of the equation, their costs are rising sharply. To grow food, farmers must purchase seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, fuel, and machinery. And here's where things get even more troubling. Many of these essential inputs are controlled by just a handful of massive corporations. Companies like Bayer, Corteva, and BASF dominate the seed and chemical markets, while a small number of equipment manufacturers control machinery pricing. Because there's so little competition among these suppliers, farmers have almost no power to negotiate better deals. They pay whatever price these corporations set. Governments around this world often step in to try to stabilize the agricultural sector through subsidies, price supports, and trade policies. In the United States, for example, farm bills allocate billions of dollars annually to support crop insurance, commodity programs, and conservation efforts. On the surface, these programs sound like a lifeline for struggling farmers. But dig a little deeper, and the picture gets more complicated. Many subsidies are distributed based on the volume of production, which means larger farming operations receive a disproportionately larger share of the benefits. Small and mid-sized family farms often see far less support. Trade policies like tariffs and export agreements can open or close international markets overnight, shifting prices dramatically without any input from the farmers themselves. So while government intervention is meant to provide a safety net, it frequently reinforces the same structural imbalances that leave individual farmers with little meaningful control over what they ultimately earn. Now, layered on top of all these structural pressures is something entirely beyond anyone's control: nature itself. A single drought in a major wheat-producing region, a flood wiping out rice paddies across Southeast Asia, or a locust swarm devastating crops across an entire continent can send global food prices skyrocketing almost overnight. These events create sudden supply shocks that ripple through commodity markets instantly, pushing prices higher for consumers everywhere. But here's the painful irony. The farmers actually hit by these disasters aren't benefiting from those rising prices. They've lost their crops entirely. There's nothing left to sell at any price. So while a consumer in another country might pay more for bread because of a drought halfway around the world, the farmer who experienced that drought is facing devastating losses, potential bankruptcy, and an uncertain future. Nature doesn't negotiate, and farmers bear the heaviest burden when it strikes. Beyond weather and natural disasters, there is another invisible force shaping what you pay for food: financial markets. Commodity futures allow investors to buy and sell contracts for agricultural products like wheat, corn, and soybeans before they are even harvested. On the surface, this system was designed to help farmers manage risk. But in practice, it has opened the door to large-scale financial speculation. When institutional investors, hedge funds, and banks pour money into agricultural commodities as a hedge against inflation or broader economic uncertainty, demand for these contracts surges artificially. This drives up commodity prices globally, not because there is less food available, not because farmers produced less, and not because consumers suddenly need more. It happens purely because of financial maneuvering happening far removed from any actual farm or dinner table. Ordinary people end up paying more at the grocery store as a direct result of decisions made in trading rooms, completely disconnected from the real world of food production. Competing against it requires not just individual effort, but coordinated systemic change at every level of the food supply chain. Frustrated by decades of shrinking margins and rising costs, many are taking matters into their own hands. Cooperatives allow farmers to pool resources and negotiate collectively, giving them slightly more leverage against powerful buyers. Farmers' markets and direct-to-consumer sales let growers bypass the middlemen entirely, keeping more of every dollar spent. Community-supported agriculture programs connect consumers directly with local farms, creating relationships built on fairness rather than corporate profit. Advocacy groups are pushing governments for stronger trade protections, better price floors, and policies that prioritize small and mid-sized farms over industrial giants. These movements represent real hope and genuine progress. However, they face enormous structural challenges. The industrial food system is deeply entrenched, heavily capitalized, and politically influential. These aren't just abstract concepts. The numbers tell a striking story on their own. Studies consistently show that farmers in the United States receive only about 14 to 20 cents of every dollar consumers spend on food. That means for every $1 you spend at the grocery store, the farmer who actually grew that food walks away with less than 20 cents. The remaining 80 cents or more flows to processing, packaging, transportation, marketing, and retail operations. What makes this even more troubling is the trend over time. That farmer share has actually declined over the decades, even as consumer food prices have steadily risen. So while shoppers are paying more at checkout, farmers are capturing a smaller slice of that growing pie. The gap between farm and fork isn't just wide, it's actively widening, and the data makes that impossible to ignore. This pricing imbalance isn't just an interesting economic footnote. It carries serious consequences that ripple far beyond individual farm finances. When farmers consistently struggle to earn a fair income, the entire agricultural system begins to fracture in ways most consumers never see. Young people stop choosing farming as a career because the financial math simply doesn't work. Rural communities that depend on farming slowly hollow out, losing schools, businesses, and generational knowledge. Meanwhile, struggling small farms get absorbed by large agricultural corporations, concentrating land ownership into fewer and fewer hands. This consolidation reduces agricultural diversity, making our food supply more vulnerable to disruptions. When a handful of massive operations control enormous portions of food production, a single disease outbreak or climate event can trigger widespread shortages. The resilience that comes from thousands of independent farmers working diverse land disappears, replaced by an efficient but dangerously fragile industrial system that prioritizes profit over long-term sustainability. So the next time you're standing in that grocery store aisle staring at the price of a dozen eggs or a loaf of bread, remember what you now know. The farmer who woke up before sunrise, who battled unpredictable weather, who invested everything into that harvest, they're not the ones setting that price. And when prices climb higher, they're rarely the ones celebrating. The money flows upward through processors, corporations, distributors, and retailers, while the farmer often struggles just to break even. Understanding this system isn't just an economic exercise. It's essential, because real change begins with awareness. When consumers, policymakers, and communities understand who actually holds pricing power in our food system, we can start making choices and demanding reforms that create something better. A system where the people feeding the world can actually afford to feed themselves too.